There's a place in the desert where nothing grows. Not now, not for thousands of years. The ground is white, crusty. If you dig down, you find ash, lots of it, mixed with sulfur, the kind that burns your nose when you smell it. This is where Sodom used to be. Maybe, probably, the archaeologists think so. Here's the thing. The Bible says God destroyed this city with fire from heaven, burned it to nothing, made it a warning for all time. But here's what makes this interesting. The evidence shows something did destroy this place. Something violent. Something that matches the biblical description in ways that are honestly unsettling. Around 1650 BCE, a city called el-Hammam just stopped existing. One moment, a thriving Bronze Age settlement. The next, gone. Not abandoned slowly, not conquered and rebuilt, just obliterated. The walls didn't fall, they exploded outward, massive stone blocks thrown hundreds of feet. The kind of force that doesn't come from earthquakes or armies. The pottery melted, not cracked from fire, melted. The outer surfaces turned to glass. That takes temperatures above 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Regular fires don't do that. Not even close. The bones tell a story too. Shattered, scattered, mixed with the ash in ways that suggest people didn't just die. They were torn apart mid-stride. And then there's the layer, a dark band in the soil, thick with ash and sulfur. It covers everything, seals the destruction like a tomb. Above this layer, nothing. No rebuilding, no slow recovery, just centuries of emptiness. Below it, a rich city, evidence of trade, agriculture, wealth. Then the line, then silence. Dr. Stephen Collins spent 15 years excavating this site. He's careful about his claims, measured. But even he admits the evidence points to something catastrophic, something sudden, something that matches what the Bible describes. An airburst, maybe. A meteor exploding in the atmosphere. The kind that flattened Tunguska in 1904. That would explain the heat, the blast pattern, the total destruction. Or an earthquake that triggered underground sulfur deposits, set them on fire, created a firestorm that consumed everything. Both are possible, both fit the evidence, both are natural explanations. But here's what keeps people up at night. The timing, the location, the fact that this specific place, described in one of history's oldest warning stories, actually shows signs of being destroyed exactly the way the story says. Coincidence? Maybe. The ancient world had lots of cities. Some got destroyed dramatically. This one happened to be in the right place at the right time to match a story. Or maybe not coincidence. Maybe the story survived because something real happened here. Something so terrible that people told the story for generations, wrapped it in religious meaning, made it a warning. The evidence doesn't prove God did it. Science can't prove that. But it does show that something matching the biblical description really happened, right where the Bible says it happened, right when the timeline suggests. That's the paradox. The more we dig, the more the physical evidence aligns with the ancient text. Not perfectly, not in every detail, but enough to make you wonder. Enough to make this more than just another archaeological site. This is a place where story and science intersect, where ancient warning and modern evidence point to the same terrible moment. And the ground is still white, still dead, still waiting to tell us what really happened that day. Before the fire came, before the destruction, before the story that would echo through millennia, there was just a city. A good city, actually, by Bronze Age standards anyway. Tall el-Hammam sat in the Jordan Valley, prime real estate. The kind of location that made trade routes converge. Water flowed nearby, soil was rich. You could grow things here, feed people, build something that lasted, and they did build. for centuries. The walls were massive, not the kind you throw up quickly. These took generations, stone blocks weighing tons, fitted together with skill that's honestly impressive even now. The kind of walls that said, "We're here to stay." Inside those walls, life happened. The normal stuff. People woke up, went to work, raised kids, argued about money, fell in love, got sick, got better, died old if they were lucky. The pottery shows this. Thousands of pieces, everyday items, cooking pots, storage jars, oil lamps, the kind of stuff you don't make if you're just passing through. You make this when you're planning for next year, and the year after that. They traded too. Goods from Egypt show up in the ruins, copper from Cyprus, obsidian from Anatolia. This wasn't some isolated village. This was a hub, a place where merchants stopped, where deals got made, where cultures mixed. The houses were solid, multi-room structures. Some had 2 stories, stone foundations, mud brick walls, roofs strong enough to sleep on during hot nights. People invested here, built for their grandchildren. There was a palace, or something like it, a big administrative building anyway, the kind that suggests organisation, government, someone keeping records, someone making decisions about water rights and grain storage and who owes what to whom. They had workshops, areas where craftsmen worked. You can tell from the debris, bronze working, pottery kilns, stone tool production, specialised labour, the kind that only happens when a society gets past basic survival, when there's enough surplus that some people can just make things instead of farming. The grain storage was extensive, massive jars sunk into floors, communal silos, enough capacity to feed thousands through a bad harvest. This was planning. This was a community that thought ahead. Religious structures too, altars, sacred spaces, the kind of architecture that suggests ritual, belief, the human need to connect with something bigger. They made offerings here, burned incense, prayed to gods whose names we'll probably never know. Children played in the streets. We know because we find toys. Small clay animals, gaming pieces, marbles made from stone. The universal evidence of childhood, of parents who cared enough to make their kids something to play with. The dead were buried with care, not just tossed aside, proper graves, sometimes with grave goods, a pot, a tool, a piece of jewellery, the kind of treatment that shows respect, that shows belief in something beyond this life. Population estimates put the city at maybe 5,000 people. Could have been more. That's substantial for the Bronze Age. That's a real city, not a town, not a village, a place with enough people that you wouldn't know everyone, where neighbourhoods had their own character, where social classes existed. The wealthy lived differently than the poor. You can see it in the house sizes, in the quality of the pottery, in who got buried with gold and who got buried with nothing, same as always, same as now. But here's what matters. This wasn't Sodom yet. Not in the biblical sense. Not in the sense of legendary wickedness. Not in the sense of a city so corrupt that destruction became inevitable. This was just a city. A successful one. A normal one by ancient standards. The evidence doesn't show widespread violence before the destruction. No signs of civil war. No burned buildings from internal conflict. The city wasn't tearing itself apart from within. It wasn't being besieged. No siege works outside the walls. No evidence of prolonged conflict. No slow starvation. No desperate last stands. Trade was still happening right up until the end. Imported goods in the final layers. Merchants still came here. Still thought it was worth the trip. Still saw this as a viable market. Construction was ongoing. Unfinished buildings in the destruction layer. Someone was building an addition. Someone was repairing a wall. Someone was planning for next season, next year. A future that would never come. The agricultural areas around the city were thriving. Fields were being worked, irrigation systems maintained, orchards producing. This was a city at its peak, not its decline. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a dying city. This wasn't a place circling the drain. This was success. This was what winning looked like in the Bronze Age. And that makes what happened next even stranger. Because successful cities don't just vanish. They get conquered and rebuilt. They decline slowly. They adapt. They survive. Unless something else happens. Something that doesn't care about success. Something that doesn't negotiate. Something that just ends things. The biblical narrative says Sodom was destroyed for wickedness, for sins so terrible that divine intervention became necessary. But what wickedness exactly? The text is actually vague about specifics. Inhospitality gets mentioned, sexual immorality, pride, ignoring the poor. Depending on which passage you read, you get different emphasis. But here's the archaeological problem. Wickedness doesn't leave traces. Immorality doesn't show up in pottery sherds. Sin isn't something you can carbon date. What we can measure is normal life. And normal life was happening here right up until it wasn't. The grain stores were full. That suggests good harvests, competent administration, a functioning economy. The tools were well made. That suggests skilled craftsmen, training, standards of quality. The buildings were maintained. That suggests civic pride, investment in the future, people who cared about their city. None of this proves virtue, obviously. You can be prosperous and wicked. You can be organized and cruel. Success and morality aren't the same thing. But it does complicate the narrative. It makes you wonder what the people who lived here were actually like. Were they monsters, or were they just people? People who woke up one morning with no idea it was their last. The thing about ancient cities is that we only get fragments, broken pieces, the stuff that survives. We don't get the conversations, the jokes, the kindnesses, the cruelties, the million small moments that make up actual life. We get walls and pottery and bones. We get evidence of what they built, what they ate, how they died, but not who they were. So when we stand in the ruins of el-Hammam, we're standing in a place that was once full of life, full of people who thought they had time, who made plans, who loved and fought and worked and rested. And then something happened, something that turned all of that into ashen memory. The city before the destruction was real, solid, successful, normal in all the ways that matter, which makes the destruction itself even more haunting. Because it wasn't inevitable, it wasn't predictable, it was just a city. And then it wasn't. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Someone in Tokyo at sunrise, someone in London at lunch, someone in California at midnight, all drifting off to the same ancient mystery together. There's something about these old stories that works for sleep. Maybe it's the distance. These things happened so long ago that they can't hurt us now. Or maybe it's just that destruction becomes beautiful when enough time passes. The terror turns into wonder. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Now back to what the ancient text recorded about this destruction. The biblical account is strange. Not in a vague way, in a specific way. The details are too precise for pure myth, too weird for simple morality tale. Genesis describes it like this. 2 angels arrive in Sodom as evening falls. Lot meets them at the city gate, insists they stay at his house. They resist at first. Plan to spend the night in the square, but Lot keeps pushing. He knows something they don't. Once inside, before they go to sleep, men from the city surround the house. All the men, the text says, young and old, Every single one. They demand Lot send out his guests. The reason they give is explicit, disturbing. This is where the city's name became synonymous with sexual sin. But here's what people miss. The sin wasn't just about sex. Read it again. The whole city acted as one. Every man participated. This wasn't individual corruption. It was collective, systematic. The entire social fabric had rotted through. Lot offers his daughters instead. His virgin daughters. Think about that. A father offering his own children to a mob, and he's the righteous one in this story, the one worth saving. That tells you something about how bad things had gotten. When that's the moral choice, you're in a dark place. The mob refuses. They want the strangers. They surge forward, try to break down the door. The angels pull Lot inside, strike the mob with blindness. But even blind, the men keep groping for the door, keep trying to break in. They don't stop, can't stop. Something has broken in them. At dawn, the angels grab Lot, grab his wife, grab his 2 daughters, physically drag them out of the city. Lot hesitates. The text says that. He lingers. Even knowing what's coming, he can't quite leave. The angels tell him to run to the mountains. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the valley. Just run. Then it happens. The Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. The text repeats that, makes it clear. This wasn't natural. This came from above. The cities were destroyed. The whole plain. Everyone living in the cities. Everything growing in the ground. Complete annihilation. Nothing left. Lot's wife looks back, turns into a pillar of salt. Abraham sees it from a distance the next morning. Smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace, the whole valley burning. Now you can read this as pure theology. Divine judgment on human wickedness. That's how it's been taught for thousands of years. God destroyed evil cities, made them an example. Don't sin or this happens to you. But look at the physical details. Burning sulfur from the sky. Smoke like a furnace. Complete destruction of multiple cities at once. Everything growing in the ground killed. The land itself poisoned. Nothing grows there afterward. These aren't vague descriptions. They're specific. Observational. Like someone trying to describe something they'd never seen before. Something that didn't fit their understanding of how the world worked. Ancient people weren't stupid. They knew fire, knew war, knew earthquakes. This was different. Different enough that they attributed it to direct divine action. Different enough that the story survived thousands of years. The sulfur detail is interesting. Sulfur burns hot, smells terrible, sticks to things. If you wanted to describe something that rained down and set everything on fire, sulfur works. But why sulfur specifically? Why not just say fire? Because maybe that's what it looked like, smelled like. Yellow chunks falling from the sky, burning everything they touched. The smoke like a furnace. That's specific too. Not smoke like a campfire. Not smoke like a burning building. Smoke like a furnace. Dense, dark, rising in a column, the kind of smoke you see from industrial fires, from things burning at extremely high temperatures, the complete destruction. Not just buildings knocked down, not just people killed, everything obliterated, the ground itself poisoned. That's not normal conquest, not normal natural disaster. That's something that changed the land at a fundamental level, and the timing. It happens at dawn. The angels rush them out as the sun rises. Then it hits. Why dawn? Why that specific timing? If this is just a story, any time works. But the text insists. Dawn. First light. That's when it happened. Lot's wife turning to salt. That's the part that sounds most like myth. But think about the geology of the area. The Dead Sea. Salt everywhere. Salt pillars formed by erosion. If you're trying to explain why there's a salt formation that looks vaguely human, you tell a story about someone who looked back, who couldn't let go, who became part of the landscape she couldn't leave, or maybe something in the blast wave crystallized her, covered her in some kind of mineral deposit, and later observers, seeing a human-shaped formation, connected it to the story they knew, the woman who looked back. The text says Lot hesitated, had to be dragged out. Why include that detail? It makes him look weak, uncertain, not the hero you'd invent. But it's human, real. People don't want to leave their homes, even when they know they should, even when destruction is coming. They hesitate. The angels physically grab them, pull them along. There's urgency in that. Desperation, like they're running out of time, like something is coming that can't be stopped or delayed. Don't look back. That's a strange instruction if this is just divine judgment. Why would looking back matter? But if something physical is happening, something bright or violent or dangerous, then don't look back makes sense. Keep moving, don't stop, don't turn around, just run. The destruction of the whole plain, not just Sodom, not just Gomorrah, the entire valley, all the cities, all the vegetation, that's a massive area. Whatever happened affected the entire region at once, simultaneously. That's not city-by-city conquest. That's one event, one cause, something big enough to devastate everything in range. Abraham sees it from miles away, the smoke visible from a great distance, rising high enough to be seen across the landscape. That's a massive fire, a massive explosion, something that sent smoke and debris high into the atmosphere. For 3,000 years, this was just a Bible story, a warning about sin and judgment. Preachers used it. Moralists referenced it. Artists painted it. But it was theology, not history. Then archaeologists started digging, and they found something that matched the story in ways nobody expected, ways that are honestly difficult to explain. The city that shouldn't be there, the destruction that shouldn't have happened, the evidence that makes you read the ancient text differently, not as pure myth, not as pure history, but as something in between, a real event filtered through ancient understanding, a catastrophe so complete that it became a moral lesson, a disaster so total that it seemed like divine intervention. Because maybe it was both. Maybe something terrible happened to these cities, something natural but catastrophic, and the survivors, trying to make sense of it, trying to explain why, found meaning in the destruction, saw judgment where there was disaster, saw sin where there was simply the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the text is exactly right. Maybe wickedness did concentrate in these cities. Maybe the social fabric did rot through. Maybe divine justice does sometimes take physical form. Maybe the universe has mechanisms we don't understand, ways of correcting imbalances, ways of responding to collective evil. We don't know, can't know. The evidence shows destruction. The text claims judgment. The gap between those two things is where faith and reason meet, where science and scripture sit across from each other, neither quite able to explain everything the other knows. What we can say is this: something happened, something real, something violent, something that matched the biblical description closely enough that when archaeologists found it, they recognized the story, saw the connection, couldn't dismiss it. The biblical account isn't proof, but it's not nothing either. It's a window into how ancient people understood catastrophe, how they processed trauma, how they found meaning in destruction. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's a surprisingly accurate description of events we're only now beginning to understand. The archaeologists knew they'd found something, but they didn't know what it was. Not at first. Stephen Collins had been digging at Tall el-Hammam for years. Each season revealed more walls, more pottery, more evidence of a major Bronze Age city. But in 2005 they hit a layer that didn't make sense. The destruction layer, that's what they call it. A band of material that marks when everything ended. Usually these layers show conquest. Arrowheads, sword marks, bodies, the normal signs of ancient warfare. This wasn't that. The layer was full of ash, thick ash, mixed with something else. Tiny spheres of melted material, pottery that had been heated so hot it turned to glass, bits of melted metal, and everywhere, scattered through it all, pieces of shattered mud brick. Mud brick doesn't shatter. It crumbles, it dissolves in rain, it breaks apart slowly over centuries. But these pieces had exploded, burst apart, like they'd been hit with something massive. Collins brought in more experts, geologists, materials scientists, people who study how things break and burn and melt. They started running tests. The pottery fragments showed heating patterns, extreme heating, temperatures over 2000 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than a normal fire can burn, hotter than a Bronze Age kiln could produce, way hotter than any ancient technology could create. Wood fires burn at about 600 degrees, maybe 800 if conditions are perfect. Ancient kilns reached maybe 1000 degrees. This was double that. Triple in some spots. The melted spheres were weird too. Tiny balls of formerly solid material, stone, pottery, metal, all melted and then cooled quickly, frozen in mid-air as they fell, like someone had taken the city and put it in a blast furnace. But there was no furnace, no volcano nearby, no obvious source for heat that extreme. The mud brick told another story. The walls of Tall el-Hammam were massive. We talked about those walls, meters thick, tons of stone and brick, built to last forever. They'd been blown apart, not knocked down, not eroded, blown. The debris field scattered outward from the city, like an explosion from inside, or from above. The top of the walls was gone, just gone. The lower sections remained, but everything above a certain height had been obliterated, pulverized, scattered across the plain. That's not how walls fall in earthquakes. Earthquakes knock. Walls over. They topple, fall in one direction. You can see which way the shaking came from. But this was different. The walls had been destroyed from the top down, like something had pressed down on them with enormous force. In 2021, a team published findings in the journal Nature. They'd analysed the destruction layer using every modern technique available: electron microscopy, chemical analysis, magnetic testing, shock physics. Their conclusion was careful, scientific, but startling. The evidence suggested an airburst, a meteor or comet exploding in the atmosphere above the city, the kind of event that happens maybe once every few thousand years. The Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908 was an airburst. A meteor exploded about 5 miles up, flattened 80 million trees. The blast was felt hundreds of miles away. No crater, nothing hit the ground, just an explosion in the air. But the devastation was complete. The evidence at Tall el-Hammam matches: the heating patterns, the melted materials, the scattered debris, the destruction from above, all consistent with an airburst. But there's more. The destruction layer contains shocked quartz. That's quartz that's been subjected to pressures so extreme the crystal structure changes. You find shocked quartz at nuclear test sites, at meteor impact craters, places where something hit with unimaginable force. You don't find it in normal archaeological sites, ever. The magnetic signature is wrong, too. The minerals in the destruction layer are magnetized, strongly magnetized, like they were subjected to an intense magnetic pulse, the kind you'd get from superheated plasma, from an explosion in the atmosphere that created a temporary magnetic field strong enough to realign iron particles in the dirt. Again, this doesn't happen in normal fires, normal destruction, normal anything. The pottery that turned to glass, that's called trinitite in nuclear testing, when sand melts and fuses, when heat is so intense that solid material becomes liquid and then cools into glass. They found pieces of pottery with one side normal and the other side melted into glass, like half the pot was in an oven and half wasn't. The directionality matters. The melted sides all face the same direction, up and slightly west. Like the heat came from a specific point in the sky, not from a fire spreading through the city, not from buildings burning, from above, from a specific angle. The timeline fits too. The destruction happened around 1650 BCE, give or take a few decades. Dating ancient sites is tricky, but multiple methods point to the same window, mid-17th century BCE. That's right in the range for when biblical scholars think Sodom was destroyed. If Sodom was real, if the biblical account has any historical basis, the dates line up, the location lines up. The Bible places Sodom in the Jordan Valley, near the Dead Sea, in a well-watered plain. Tall el-Hammam sits exactly where the Bible says Sodom should be. The geography matches perfectly. The size matches. Sodom was described as a major city, one of 5 cities in the plain. Tall el-Hammam was the largest settlement in the region during the Bronze Age, by far, 10 times bigger than anything else nearby. The destruction matches. Total, complete, nothing left. The city was abandoned after the event, never rebuilt. The area remained empty for centuries. Just like the biblical account says, the land was cursed, poisoned. Nothing grew there. The sulfur is there too, not everywhere, but scattered through the destruction layer, chunks of sulfur, balls of sulfur, mixed with the ash and melted material. Sulfur burns hot, smells terrible, sticks to things when it melts. The Bible specifically mentions sulfur, burning sulfur from the sky. Most translations say brimstone, but the Hebrew word is gophrith, sulfur, the exact material found in the destruction layer. Now, sulfur exists naturally in this region. The Dead Sea area has sulfur deposits, so finding sulfur isn't proof of anything. But finding it mixed with melted pottery and shocked quartz and magnetically aligned minerals, that's different. The team that published the Nature paper was careful. They didn't say, "We found Sodom." They didn't make biblical claims. They just presented the evidence, described what they found, offered the Airburst explanation based on the physical data. But the implications are obvious. If an airburst destroyed Tall el-Hammam around 1650 BCE, and if Tall el-Hammam is where Sodom should be, and if the destruction matches the biblical description, then maybe the Bible is describing a real event. Not divine judgment, not supernatural fire from heaven, but a natural disaster, a cosmic accident, a rock from space exploding at exactly the wrong moment over exactly the wrong place. Except it still feels like judgment, doesn't it? The timing, the totality, the way nothing survived, the way the land stayed dead for centuries afterward. An airburst would explain the heat, the melted materials, the scattered debris, the destruction from above. All of it fits. An airburst would create a pressure wave, a blast of superheated air moving faster than sound. That wave would flatten buildings, shatter walls, turn people into ash instantly. Anyone caught in the open would be vaporized. Anyone inside would be crushed when the buildings collapsed. The heat would come before the blast, a flash of thermal radiation, hot enough to melt pottery, hot enough to turn sand to glass, hot enough to set everything flammable on fire simultaneously. The whole city would ignite at once. Not a spreading fire, a sudden inferno, then the pressure wave, travelling at hundreds of miles per hour, hitting the city like a hammer, walls exploding outward, roofs lifting off and disintegrating, everything not melted by the heat getting pulverized by the blast. The sulfur could come from the meteor itself. Some meteors contain sulfur, or it could come from the ground. The extreme heat and pressure could have released sulfur from deposits below the city, vaporized it, sent it into the air where it rained back down still burning. The smoke would have been visible for miles, a massive column rising into the sky, dark, dense, full of ash and debris, exactly like the Bible describes, like smoke from a furnace. The blast would have affected the whole valley, not just tall el-Hammam, all the nearby settlements, the entire plain. Archaeological surveys show multiple sites in the area were abandoned around the same time, all at once, like something hit the whole region simultaneously. 5 cities. The Bible mentions 5 cities destroyed: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, Zor. 5 cities in the plain. Archaeological evidence shows at least 5 major settlements in the Jordan Valley during this period, all abandoned around 1650 BCE. The survivors would have fled. Those far enough away to survive the blast, they would have run, looked back and seen their world ending, seen the cities burning, seen the smoke rising, known everyone they loved was dead. How do you process that? How do you explain what you saw? You don't have words for airburst, for meteor, for cosmic impact. Those concepts don't exist yet. So you say God did it. You say the cities were wicked and God destroyed them. You say angels came and warned the righteous and everyone else burned. You turn disaster into meaning, turn random cosmic violence into divine justice. Because the alternative is too terrible. The alternative is that you survived by accident, by luck, by being in the right place when the sky fell. And your neighbours, your friends, your family who stayed behind, they died for no reason. Just wrong place, wrong time. Better to believe it meant something. Better to believe wickedness was punished. Better to believe the righteous was saved and the wicked destroyed. Better to believe in a universe where things happen for reasons, where destruction is judgment, where survival is reward. The story gets told, retold, passed down. Each telling adds details, removes others, shapes the narrative. The disaster becomes a warning. The cities become examples. Don't be like Sodom. Don't invite destruction. Don't anger God. But underneath the theology, underneath the moral lesson, underneath the warning, there's a real event, real cities, real people, real destruction. The archaeologists keep digging, keep testing, keep analysing. Each season reveals more evidence of extreme heat, more melted materials, more proof that something catastrophic happened here. They found human remains in the destruction layer, not many. Most people were probably vaporized, but a few skeletons, caught in the blast, buried under debris. Their bones show trauma, violent death, sudden death. They found storage jars full of grain, carbonized, turned to charcoal instantly. The grain was being stored for next season, for planting, for feeding the city. Through winter, it never got used, just burned where it sat. They found tools, weapons, jewellery, everyday items, all mixed in the destruction layer, all covered in ash and melted material. Life interrupted, stopped mid-moment, frozen in time. The city was thriving when it died, not declining, not struggling, thriving at its peak. Maximum population, maximum prosperity, then gone. That makes it worse somehow. If the city was failing, if people were leaving anyway, if it was dying slowly. The destruction would be tragic but not shocking. But this was a city full of life, full of people, full of plans and dreams and futures, all erased in seconds, maybe minutes, certainly less than an hour, from normal day to total annihilation. That fast. The evidence keeps piling up. More papers published, more analysis done, more experts weighing in. The airburst theory gains support, becomes the leading explanation, not proven. Science rarely proves anything absolutely, but strongly supported, consistent with all available data, and the biblical connection becomes harder to dismiss, not as proof of divine intervention, but as evidence that the Bible sometimes preserves real history, real events, real disasters that people witnessed and recorded and tried to explain. Maybe both things are true. Maybe an airburst destroyed these cities, and maybe that airburst was divine judgment. Maybe God uses natural processes. Maybe cosmic accidents aren't accidents. Maybe the universe has mechanisms we don't understand, ways of responding to human behavior, ways of correcting imbalances. Or maybe it was just terrible luck. A rock from space. A city in the wrong place. Timing so bad it seemed like judgment, seemed like punishment, seemed like the universe itself was angry. We don't know, can't know. The evidence shows what happened, not why. Not whether it meant anything beyond physics and chemistry and bad timing, but standing in that destruction layer, holding pieces of melted pottery, seeing the scattered remains of massive walls, knowing thousands of people died here in seconds, you feel something beyond science, beyond evidence. You feel the weight of it, the totality, the finality, and you understand why survivors needed it to mean something, why they turned disaster into judgment, why they made it a warning, why the story survived, why we're still talking about it, still digging, still trying to understand, because some destructions are so complete they demand explanation. Some disasters are so total they require meaning, and sometimes the ancient stories, the ones we thought were myths, turn out to be memories, distorted by time, shaped by theology, but rooted in something real, something terrible, something that actually happened. So what actually happened? What does the science say? The airburst theory explains a lot, maybe everything. But let's break down what that means. What an airburst actually does, how it destroys things, why the evidence looks the way it does. First, the object itself. A meteor, probably. Could be a comet, something from space, rock or ice or both. Doesn't matter much. What matters is speed. These things travel fast, really fast, tens of thousands of miles per hour. When something moves that fast, it carries enormous energy. More energy than any bomb humans could build, more than nuclear weapons, way more. As it enters the atmosphere, friction heats it up. The air can't get out of the way fast enough, compresses, heats. The object starts to glow, bright, brighter than the sun. Anyone looking up would see a streak of light, growing, getting bigger, coming closer. The heat builds. The object starts to break apart. Stress from the heat, from the pressure, from moving so fast through thickening air. Cracks form, pieces split off, but it's still moving, still falling, still carrying all that energy. Then it explodes. Not when it hits the ground. Before. Maybe 5 miles up, maybe 3. The exact height depends on size and composition, but somewhere in the lower atmosphere, the whole thing comes apart. All at once, all that energy releases, instantly. The explosion creates a fireball, superheated plasma, hotter than anything on Earth, hotter than the surface of the sun. This fireball expands, fast, pushes air outward in all directions, creates a pressure wave, a blast wave, moving faster than sound. The thermal pulse comes first. Light travels faster than pressure, so the heat arrives before the blast. Everything below the explosion gets hit with intense thermal radiation. Think of it like opening an oven, but the oven is the size of a city, and it's 10 times hotter than any oven could be. Anything flammable ignites instantly. Wood, cloth, grain, skin. All of it catches fire at the same moment, not spreading from building to building, just everything burning at once. The whole city becomes flame. Pottery heats so fast it changes. The clay structure breaks down, melts, turns to glass on one side while the other side stays normal, because the heat comes from above, from one direction. One side of every object faces the fireball. That side melts. The other side stays cooler, protected by the object itself. Stone doesn't burn, but it heats up, expands, cracks. Pieces break off. The surface layer can actually melt, turn to glass. They found this at tall el-Hammam. Stone that had been partially melted, not evenly, just the top surface. The side facing up. Metal melts too. Bronze has a melting point around 900 degrees Celsius. The fireball is way hotter. Any bronze tools or weapons would liquefy, drip, form little balls as the metal falls through air, then cool quickly, freeze in place. Tiny bronze spheres scattered through the destruction layer. The pressure wave comes next, seconds after the thermal pulse, the blast of compressed air, moving at hundreds of miles per hour, hitting everything like a giant hammer. Buildings don't stand a chance. The walls we talked about. Those massive walls, tons of stone and brick, they get hit from above. The pressure pushes down, sideways. The top of the wall explodes, just disintegrates. Pieces fly outward. The lower sections might survive. Might. But everything above a certain height gets pulverized. People die instantly. Anyone outside gets hit with both pulses, thermal and pressure. The heat burns them. The blast tears them apart. Anyone inside has maybe a second longer. The buildings collapse. Walls fall. Roofs cave in. Tons of debris falling, crushing everything underneath. The whole event takes maybe 60 seconds, from explosion to silence. 1 minute, that's all. A city of thousands, gone, just gone. The aftermath is chaos. Fires burning everywhere, smoke rising, thick black smoke, full of ash and debris. The column would rise miles into the sky, visible across the whole region. Anyone within 50 miles would see it, would know something terrible happened. The heat would persist. Not fireball hot, but hot. Fires burning for hours, maybe days. Everything flammable consumed, turned to ash. The ash mixing with melted material, with shattered stone, with pulverized brick, creating that destruction layer, that band of material that marks when everything ended. The sulfur comes from two sources. Some meteors contain sulfur compounds. When they explode, that sulfur gets released, vaporized, falls back down. But also, the extreme heat and pressure can release sulfur from ground deposits. The Dead Sea region has sulfur, lots of it, underground. The Airburst could have heated the ground enough to vaporize that sulfur, send it into the air, where it would rain back down, still hot, still burning. Sulfur burns with a distinctive smell. Rotten eggs. Terrible. Anyone surviving nearby would smell it, would associate the destruction with that smell, would remember it, tell others about it. The smell of judgment, the smell of divine anger. The magnetic effect happened during the explosion. The fireball creates plasma. Ionized gas, moving charges create magnetic fields. Strong magnetic fields. Brief but intense. These fields can magnetize minerals in the ground, realign iron particles, leave a signature, a magnetic fingerprint that says something extraordinary happened here. Shocked quartz forms under extreme pressure, more pressure than normal geological processes create. You need either a meteor impact or a nuclear explosion. Nothing else works. The pressure changes the crystal structure permanently. You can see it under a microscope. Distinctive patterns. Unmistakable. Finding shocked quartz at an archaeological site is weird. Really weird. It shouldn't be there, unless something hit. Unless pressures reached levels that normal human activity can't produce. Unless the site experienced forces that only come from space or from nuclear weapons. The directionality of damage tells you where the explosion happened, which direction the blast came from. At Tall el-Hammam, everything points to a specific angle, up and slightly west. The melted sides of Pottery, the direction walls fell, the scatter pattern of debris, all consistent with an explosion in the sky to the west of the city. You can calculate the height of the explosion from the damage pattern, how far things were thrown, how much heat different areas received. The math is complex, but it gives you a number, probably 3 to 5 miles up, maybe a bit higher, low enough to cause massive damage, high enough that no crater formed. The size of the object matters. Too small and it burns up completely. Too large and it hits the ground, makes a crater, changes the damage pattern. This was right in the middle. Big enough to reach the lower atmosphere with significant mass, small enough to explode before impact. Estimates suggest maybe 50 meters across. Could be smaller, could be a bit larger, dense rock. Moving at cosmic speeds, carrying energy equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons, all released at once over a populated area. The frequency of these events is important. Airbursts this size happen rarely, very rarely, maybe once every few thousand years, somewhere on Earth. But Earth is big. Most of it is ocean. Most of it is empty. The odds of an airburst hit in a city are tiny, incredibly tiny. But not zero, never zero. And over thousands of years, unlikely things happen. Rare events occur. Cosmic dice roll enough times and eventually they come up snake eyes. Eventually an airburst happens over a populated area. Eventually someone is there to witness it, to survive it, to tell the story. The Tunguska event proves it can happen. 1908. Siberia. An airburst flattened 800 square miles of forest. If that had happened over Moscow or London, millions would have died. But it happened over empty forest. Almost nobody there. Just trees. And even so, people saw it, felt it, reported the flash of light, the blast wave, the fires. Imagine Tunguska over a Bronze Age city. No warning, no understanding of what's happening. Just normal day. Then the sky lights up, then everything burns. Then the blast hits, then silence, then smoke, then nothing. The survivors will be traumatized completely. Their world just ended. Everyone they knew is dead. The city is gone. The land is burning. And they have no framework for understanding what happened. No science, no astronomy, no concept of meteors or airbursts or cosmic impacts. So they explain it the only way they can. Divine intervention. The gods did this. The city was wicked. The gods were angry. This was punishment. This was judgment. This was warning. And maybe they're not wrong. Not entirely. Because whether you call it physics or providence, the result is the same. The city is gone. The people are dead. The land is cursed. And the story will be told for thousands of years. The science explains the how, the physics, the chemistry, the mechanics of destruction, energy and heat and pressure, cause and effect, observable, measurable, testable. But science doesn't explain the why that city, why that moment, why those people. Science doesn't do meaning, doesn't do purpose, just describes what happened, not why it mattered. The biblical account does meaning, does purpose, says this happened because the city was wicked, because evil demands response, because justice exists in the universe, because actions have consequences. Both can be true. The airburst happened. Physics explains it. But maybe physics isn't the whole story. Maybe the universe has mechanisms we don't understand, ways of responding, ways of correcting, ways of judging. Or maybe it was just bad luck, random chance, cosmic accident, a rock from space, a city in the wrong place. Timing so terrible it seemed like judgment, seemed like punishment. But really just probability, just statistics, just the universe being indifferent. We can't know. The evidence shows what happened, not why, not whether it meant anything beyond physics. The destruction layer doesn't contain purpose, just ash and melted pottery and shocked quartz. But standing there, in that place, holding pieces of the city, knowing thousands died here in seconds, you feel something beyond science, beyond evidence, beyond measurement. You feel the weight of it, the enormity, the finality, and you understand why the story survived, why it became warning, why we still tell it, still dig, still try to understand. Because some events are too big for just science, too meaningful for just physics, too important for just facts. They demand story, demand meaning, demand that we wrestle with what they say about existence, about justice, about whether the universe cares. The science gives us the mechanism, the story gives us the meaning, and maybe we need both. Maybe truth lives in the tension between them, between what we can measure and what we can only feel, between evidence and meaning, between physics and purpose. The airburst destroyed the city. That's what the science says. That's what the evidence shows. Fire from the sky, heat and pressure and destruction, all explainable, all consistent with natural processes, all within the laws of physics. But fire from the sky is also what the Bible says: judgment from heaven, divine response to human wickedness, supernatural intervention, all within the framework of meaning, of purpose, of a universe that responds to how we live. Same event, different explanations, both describing something real, something that actually happened, something that left evidence we can still find, still measure, still try to understand. The question isn't whether it happened. The evidence is clear. The question is what it means, whether it was just physics, just probability, just bad luck, or whether it was something more, something that makes us uncomfortable, something that suggests the universe might not be as indifferent as we like to think. 60 seconds, that's how long it took. From the moment the sky lit up to the moment everything went silent. 1 minute, maybe less. Think about that. A whole city. Thousands of people. Centuries of accumulated life. All of it gone in the time it takes to microwave a cup of coffee. The people wouldn't have understood what was happening. How could they? They'd never seen anything like this. Nobody had. Not in living memory. Not in their grandparents' stories. Not in the oldest tales their culture preserved. Morning starts normal. The sun is already hot. It's the Jordan Valley in summer. Hot is what you get. People are working, hauling water, grinding grain, fixing walls, the usual stuff. Kids are playing somewhere, making noise, getting yelled at for being underfoot. Merchants are arguing over prices. Someone's bread is burning. Someone else is laughing at them. Then the sky changes. First there's light. Not normal light. Brighter. Way brighter. Like someone lit a second sun. But this sun is moving, growing, getting closer. The light is wrong. Too white. Too intense. It hurts to look at. Some people look anyway. Can't help it. Human nature. When something weird happens, you look. You stare. Try to figure out what you're seeing. They see a streak, a line of fire cutting across the sky, coming from the northwest, moving impossibly fast, trailing smoke or steam or something, getting bigger, closer, louder, because now there's sound. A roar, like thunder but continuous, building, getting louder and louder until it's not just sound anymore, it's pressure, vibration. Your chest shakes, your bones shake, the ground shakes. People start to panic. Some run. Where? Doesn't matter. Anywhere. Away from the light, into buildings, into cellars, grabbing children, screaming names, looking for family, for safety, for some way to make sense of what's happening. Others freeze, just stand there, staring up, watching the fire come, too shocked to move, too confused to understand. Their brains can't process this. No framework exists for what they're seeing. The heat hits first. Imagine opening an oven, but the oven is the entire sky. And it's not 500 degrees, it's thousands of degrees. The thermal pulse travels at the speed of a light, reaches the ground instantly. Your skin feels it. Sudden, intense heat, like standing too close to a bonfire, but there's no bonfire. The heat is everywhere, coming from above, from the air itself. Cloth ignites, just catches fire spontaneously. The tunic you're wearing starts smoking, then burning. Your hair singes, curls up, burns away. The wooden door frame next to you bursts into flame. The grain in the storage jar, the reeds on the roof, everything flammable just lights up, all at once, across the entire city. People are burning, alive, screaming, rolling on the ground. But the ground is heating up too. The stones are hot, the dirt is hot, there's nowhere to go, nowhere safe, nowhere cool. The pottery on the shelf starts to glow, red, then orange, then white. The clay is melting, one side anyway, the side facing up, facing the fireball. That side turns to liquid, drips, runs like water. The other side stays solid, protected by the pot itself, creating those strange half-melted vessels archaeologists would find 3,600 years later. Bronze tools are melting too, weapons, jewellery, anything metal. The bronze liquefies, forms droplets, falls through the air, cools into tiny spheres, little balls of metal that will get mixed into the ash layer, scattered through the destruction, evidence of temperatures no normal fire could reach. The stone walls are cracking, limestone and mud brick, heating too fast, expanding, splitting, pieces breaking off. The surface layer is actually melting, turning to glass, a thin glaze forming on the top of the walls, on the upper surfaces of stones, anywhere facing the sky. This all happens in maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds of thermal pulse, 10 seconds of impossible heat, 10 seconds that feel like forever when you're burning. Then the blast wave hits. The explosion created a wall of compressed air, a pressure front moving at supersonic speed, hundreds of miles per hour, carrying the force of multiple nuclear weapons, pushing everything in its path. The sound arrives first, a crack, sharp, loud enough to rupture eardrums, loud enough to feel like your head is splitting. Then the wind. But wind isn't the right word. This is solid air, a hammer made of atmosphere, hitting everything at once. The walls explode. Those massive walls, tons of stone, centuries of work, they just disintegrate. The top sections pulverize, turn to dust and fragments, flying outward, sideways, down. The stones that took 10 men to lift are thrown like pebbles, tumbling through the air, smashing into other buildings, into people, into the ground. Buildings collapse, all of them, at once. Roofs cave in, walls fall outward, upper stories pancake down onto lower floors. Tons of debris, tons of stone and brick and burning wood, all falling, crushing everything underneath. People die, instantly. The lucky ones anyway. The ones outside get hit by the pressure wave, torn apart. Bodies ripped to pieces by the force. The ones inside get crushed, buried under collapsing buildings. Tons of material falling on them, breaking bones, crushing skulls, suffocating them in dust and ash. Some survive the initial blast, trapped, injured, buried under rubble. They can hear the fires burning, smell the smoke, feel the heat, but they can't move, can't get out, can't breathe properly. The dust is too thick, getting in their lungs, making them cough, choking them. The fires keep burning. Everything that can burn is burning. Wood, grain, bodies. The smoke rises, thick black columns full of ash and soot. Particles of destroyed city, rising miles into the sky, visible across the entire valley. Anyone within 50 miles can see it. This massive pillar of smoke, marking where Sodom used to be. The heat persists, not fireball hot anymore, but hot, several hundred degrees. The fire's burning through what's left, consuming everything organic, turning it to ash, white ash, grey ash, black ash. Different materials burning at different temperatures, creating layers, bands of colour in what will become the destruction layer. The sulfur is everywhere. Some came from the meteor itself, vaporized in the explosion, falling back down, but more is coming from the ground. The intense heat released sulfur deposits, underground pockets, heated them until they vaporized, sent sulfur gas into the air, where it's now raining back down. Still hot, still burning. Sulfur burns blue, creates that distinctive smell. Rotten eggs, brimstone. The survivors downwind are gagging on it, eyes watering, throats burning. The smell is overwhelming, sickening, and it's mixing with the smell of burning bodies, burning food, burning everything, creating a stench that will linger for days. The magnetic field created by the plasma is doing weird things, realigning iron particles in the soil, in the pottery, creating a magnetic signature, permanent, detectable thousands of years later with sensitive equipment. A fingerprint that says something extraordinary happened here. Something that created electromagnetic forces way beyond normal. Shocked quartz is forming. The pressure wave created forces intense enough to change the crystal structure of sand, of quartz grains, permanently deforming them, creating patterns you can see under a microscope. Patterns that only form under extreme pressure. Meteor impact pressure, nuclear explosion pressure. Nothing else comes close. The whole event is over in 60 seconds, maybe 90. From first light to final collapse, 1 minute. 1 minute and a great city is gone, erased, turned into burning rubble, into a destruction layer that will puzzle archaeologists for millennia. The silence that follows is almost worse than the noise. No more screaming, no more crashing. Just the crackle of fires, the occasional groan of settling debris, the wind blowing through destroyed streets, carrying ash, carrying the smell of death. Survivors emerge, not many, maybe a few hundred, maybe less. They were outside the city, far enough away, or in the right place, behind something, in a valley. Somewhere the blast wave couldn't reach fully. They're burned, injured, in shock. Staring at where their home used to be, the city is unrecognizable. The walls are gone, the buildings are gone. The streets are buried under debris. Everything is smoking, burning, covered in ash. There are bodies everywhere, crushed, burned, buried. Thousands of bodies. Everyone they knew, everyone they loved. Dead, all dead. They can't go back. The heat is too intense. The fires are still burning. The rubble is unstable, dangerous, and there's nothing to go back to anyway. No food, no water, no shelter, just destruction, just death, just ash. So they leave, walk away, carrying whatever they grabbed, carrying their trauma, their memories, their story of what happened, fire from the sky, judgment from heaven, the day the gods destroyed Sodom. They'll tell this story, pass it down. Generation after generation, the details will change, get embellished, get interpreted. But the core will remain. A city was destroyed, suddenly, completely, by fire from above, in a single day, in a single hour, in 60 seconds. And they'll say it was judgment. Because how else do you explain it? How else do you make sense of such complete destruction, such perfect timing, such terrible power? It had to mean something, had to be more than accident, more than random chance. So it becomes a warning, a lesson, a story about what happens when cities become too wicked, when people forget how to live right, when evil goes unchecked. The story spreads, gets written down, becomes scripture, becomes part of the moral foundation of Western civilization. But underneath the meaning, underneath the theology, underneath the lessons and warnings, there's just physics, just a rock from space, just bad timing, just 60 seconds when everything went wrong, when the universe was indifferent, when chance played out in the most terrible way possible. 60 seconds. That's all it took. To end a civilization, to create a legend, to leave evidence that still confuses us, still makes us wonder, still makes us dig, still makes us ask what really happened, what it meant, whether it was judgment or accident or something we can't quite name. When people talk about the destruction of Sodom, they often picture just one city turning to ash. But what happened wasn't limited to Sodom. It wasn't a single tragedy. The disaster that struck that day changed an entire region. It shattered city after city. The Jordan Valley, once full of life, turned into a wasteland almost overnight. Let's look at the bigger picture. Archaeologists have dug across the southern Jordan Valley for years. They expected the usual mix of ruins, some destroyed in war, some abandoned, some built over. But what they found was strange. At dozens of sites, the same story appeared in the dirt. There was a sharp line. Below that line, signs of busy towns, houses, workshops, storage rooms, even temples. Above it, just silence. No more houses, no more people, just layers of wind-blown dust and sand. It wasn't just Sodom. It was tall el-Hammam, Bab-edh-Dra, Numera, and many smaller places. Each one showed the same thing, a sudden stop. Life ended, and it didn't come back for centuries. Here's what's weird. The pattern shows up everywhere in this valley. At Tall el-Hammam, the city covered over 100 acres, huge for the time. It had big defensive walls, wide streets, and thick layers of mud brick. Just across the river, Bab-edh-Dra and Numera were smaller, but still real towns with hundreds or even thousands of people. All of them ended at the same time, in the same way. Around 1650 BCE, give or take a few decades, the region's life blinked out. Think about what that means. Imagine a river valley dotted with towns, palm trees, fields of barley and wheat, herds of goats and sheep, people trading, visiting, living their lives. Then, in a single moment, it's all gone. The silence that followed wasn't just about the dead. It was about the living who left, or who never returned. Now, how do we know all these sites were destroyed together? Here's where science gets interesting. When archaeologists dig, they look for clues about time. Pottery styles, for example, change over the years. If you find the same kind of pottery in two places, you can guess those places were active at the same time. Well, the pottery below the stop line at all these valley sites matches. The same shapes, decorations, and materials. It's like finding the same brand of cereal in different kitchens and knowing people were eating breakfast at the same time. But it's not just pottery. The destruction layers at these sites tell a similar story. They're full of ash, burned bricks, bits of pottery melted into strange shapes, and tiny round droplets of metal. These aren't the normal leftovers from a house fire or a battle. They show temperatures far above what wood or thatch or even war could produce. Something else did this, and the dates line up. Scientists use radiocarbon dating to check how old bits of burned material are. Over and over the numbers point to around 1650 BCE, not just at one place, but across the valley, dozens of miles apart. The fire came, and then everything stopped. What about the land itself? The Jordan Valley used to be famous for its rich soils. The Bible even calls it well-watered, like the garden of the Lord. But right after the disaster, the landscape changed. There are signs of salty soil, salinity, as scientists call it. You see, when the blast hit, it likely churned up the ground. It could have thrown salty muck from the nearby Dead Sea across the land. When that salty layer settled on the fields, nothing grew. Not barley, not wheat, not even weeds. This isn't just a guess. Soil tests from the area show a spike in salt right at the same time the cities died. In some places, the salt levels are 6 times higher than normal. That's enough to kill crops for years. Even today, if a field gets a heavy dose of salt, it can take decades, sometimes centuries, for the land to recover. Back then, with no modern tools or chemicals, people had no way to fix it. Their farms turned into deserts. And it's not just the soil. The blast itself left traces in the ground. Scientists have found tiny pieces of glass called trinitite. Normally these only form during nuclear explosions or meteor impacts. They come from sand and stone melting in extreme heat, over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's way hotter than any campfire, house fire, or even a city burning in war. Some of these glassy pieces are mixed with strange minerals, melted together by temperatures you can't get on purpose with Bronze Age technology. Even today you'd need special equipment to make them. But they're right there, in the destroyed cities, mixed with the ash and collapsed buildings. There's more. Remember those tiny metal balls? They're called spherules. They form when metals like bronze or iron melt, get blasted into the air and cool quickly as they fall. You can make them in a lab by vaporizing metal with a laser. But these spherules are ancient. They're scattered across the destruction zone, showing up in places miles apart. Each one is a little time capsule, a frozen drop of metal from the moment everything changed. And then there's the shocked quartz. This is a special type of sand grain. Under a microscope, it looks twisted and cracked in a way that only happens under extreme pressure. You don't get shocked quartz from a house fire or even a volcanic eruption. You get it from an impact, something slamming into the ground or exploding with unbelievable force. The only other places we find this are at known meteor craters or nuclear test sites. So now we have a list. All the towns in the valley destroyed at once. A sharp stop in pottery and building styles, ash, melted glass, and metal spherules in the same layers everywhere, salt in the soil, shocked quartz, and a long empty silence after. That's a mountain of evidence, not for a slow decline, but for a single sudden disaster. But what happened next? After the fires and the blast, the survivors, if there were any, faced a new problem. Famine. With the crops dead and water poisoned by salt and ash, nobody could grow food. The animals died or were driven off. Wells turned brackish. The valley, which once fed thousands, became a place to avoid. Archaeological surveys show something remarkable. For about 600 years after the event, the entire region was mostly empty. No new towns, no new temples, no sign of people farming or trading, just the ruins slowly wearing down under wind and sun. It's as if a giant hand swept the board clean and nobody wanted to play there again. Compare that to other disasters. Usually when a city falls to war, fire or earthquake, people rebuild, sometimes right away, sometimes after a few years, but not here. The Jordan Valley was left alone. People skirted around it, chose other places to live. The story of the blast must have spread. Maybe people called it cursed, or haunted, or just unlucky. Maybe they told stories to warn their children. Either way, the land stayed empty. Now, let's talk about the trade routes. Before the disaster, this region was a crossroads. Caravans moved north and south, carrying copper, tin, spices and cloth. Taxes and tolls from these routes made the cities rich. But after the blast, the roads went quiet. Traders found new paths around the valley. The whole economy shifted. Cities to the north and south had to adjust. The loss of the Jordan Valley rippled out for hundreds of miles, and the effects didn't stop at the border. Some researchers think the sudden disappearance of these cities helped shape the stories in nearby lands. You find echoes in Egyptian texts, warnings about cities that vanished, tales of destruction from the sky. Even in distant Mesopotamia, scribes recorded stories about fires that swept across towns, leaving only ruins. It's easy to think of this as just an old story, but the evidence in the dirt matches the legends. A sudden, fiery event. Cities erased, land poisoned, generations lost, and not just at one spot but across a whole landscape. Let's look closer at one of the towns, Bab ed-Dra. This site sat on the edge of the Dead Sea, a few miles south of el-Hammam. Before the disaster, it was full of life. Houses packed close together, big storage rooms for grain, burial towers for the dead. When the blast came, the city ended instantly. The ruins show the same melted pottery, the same ash, the same odd glass as everywhere else. But Bab ed-Dra also had hundreds of tombs. When archaeologists opened them, they found something strange. The burials stopped suddenly. No gradual decline, no sign people were moving away. Just a hard stop. The last burials matched the date of the blast. After that, nothing. The people didn't come back, even to bury their dead. Move west to Numaira, another city near the same salt flats. Same story. Thriving community. Sudden end. The destruction layer is full of melted mud brick. The walls are knocked outward, as if hit by a giant invisible hammer. The roofs are gone. Everything flammable is gone. The only things left are the stones and ash, and those same metal spherules, scattered like breadcrumbs across the site. Even the wild animals vanished. Usually when people leave, nature takes over. Jackals, birds and plants fill the gap. But for generations the land stayed mostly empty. The salt did its work. Only the hardiest weeds survived. The valley's old nickname, the Garden of the Lord, became a sad joke. Now, you might wonder, was it just the blast and the salt? Or did something else scare people away? Some researchers think there was a wave of disease after the disaster. Burning sulfur and ash can create toxic air. Water supplies fouled by chemicals may have caused sickness. If people tried to return, they might have gotten sick and left again. The area's bad reputation only grew. Let's pause and imagine a traveller walking through the valley 100 years after the event. The ruins are still there, half buried but visible. Blackened stones, sharp bits of glass in the sand. Nothing grows. The air feels heavy. The traveller hurries through, not wanting to linger. At night, he tells a story around the campfire. This is the place where fire fell from the sky, where cities vanished in a single day. The story survives, even as memories fade, and this is where the science meets the legend. The destruction was so complete, so sudden, that it became a story everyone heard. It wasn't just about Sodom. It was about a whole lost region, a land that went from wealth to emptiness in the blink of an eye. Let's talk numbers. At its peak, the Jordan Valley might have held 40,000 people, maybe more. After the disaster, that number dropped to almost zero. The valley was empty for centuries. When people finally came back, they built smaller villages, not big cities. The memory of what happened shaped how they lived. They avoided the old ruins. They farmed carefully, watching for signs of salt in the soil. And the traces of the blast never fully faded. Even now, archaeologists find layers of strange glass, bits of melted metal, and salt crusts that shouldn't be there. The magnetic signature in the ground is still detectable, showing that something massive happened. A fingerprint left by a disaster nobody could have understood at the time. All these clues add up. The destruction wasn't just local, it was regional. It wiped out communities, ended trade, poisoned land, and left a mark that lasted 600 years. The silence that followed wasn't just absence, it was a wound that took centuries to heal. Sometimes, when you read the old stories, they sound too big to be true. Cities destroyed in a day, land turned to salt, people afraid to return. But the science lines up with the legend. The evidence in the ground tells the same tale. Not just one city lost, but a whole region erased, almost overnight. And that's the real paradox of Sodom. It's not just about sin or judgment or one unlucky city. It's about a disaster so big that it changed everything around it. A single moment of destruction that echoed for centuries. A story written not just in words, but in ash, glass, and silence. After the fire came the silence. And that silence lasted for centuries. So now we're left with this long silence. Not just a quiet year or two, but hundreds of years, where the Jordan Valley seems to vanish from the map. People didn't come back. No new cities rose from the ashes. Farmers, traders, travellers, they all avoided this stretch of land. It's rare for a place so rich, so important, to stay empty that long. The question is, why did the silence last? What kept people away for so many generations? Let's break it down. One clue comes from the ground itself. When archaeologists dig into the soil after the disaster, they find not just salt and glass, but a total lack of human activity. Usually after a city falls, you see signs of squatters or small groups moving in. Maybe a shepherd's camp, maybe a few new graves. Here, though, there's just nothing. The layers are flat. Wind and rain pile up dust over fallen walls, but nobody comes to clear it. That's unusual. Ancient people were practical. If land was good, they would use it, even if it meant dealing with a few old ruins. What about the animals? Sometimes, when humans leave, animals move in fast. In other abandoned places, you find animal bones or burrows in the ruins. But here, animal signs are rare. Even the toughest wild goats and donkeys seem to have stayed away. The salt in the soil may have poisoned the plants they ate. With no grass, no seeds, and no water, the valley was a dead zone. Imagine looking out over miles of land and seeing not just empty fields, but nothing alive at all. No birds, no bugs, no green anywhere. Just silence. Now, let's look at the climate. Was there a drought? The wider region did have some dry years, but nothing so extreme that it explains this complete abandonment. Other valleys nearby kept going, even if times were tough. They didn't turn into deserts. So it wasn't just bad weather that drove people out. There's another detail that matters: the water. Before the disaster, the Jordan Valley had streams and wells. People grew crops with river water and rain. After the event, many springs dried up. Tests on ancient wells show that the water levels dropped or turned salty. People couldn't drink the water. They couldn't use it to cook or bathe. Even if they wanted to come back, life would have been hard. And so, For hundreds of years, the valley was off limits. Think about what that means. Whole generations grew up hearing stories about this empty place. Maybe they called it cursed. Maybe they thought ghosts or angry gods lived there. The land itself became part of the warning. Stay away. Don't build. Don't even pass through if you can help it. But the silence isn't just about fear. It's also about lost memory. Over time, stories fade, details get mixed up. People remember that something terrible happened, but not exactly what or why. When new groups finally do move in, they find ruins and strange glass in the sand. Maybe they dig into the old walls looking for treasure. Maybe they wonder about the people who lived there before. But there's no one to explain what happened. The living memory is gone. Let's talk about the timeline. Archaeologists count at least 600 years of near silence in the Jordan Valley after the disaster. Just to put that in perspective, that's like if a city was wiped out in the year 1400 and nobody moved in again until the 2000s. Think about how much history passes in that span. Kingdoms rise and fall. Languages change. Religions are born and fade away. Yet the land sits, untouchable, waiting. During this silence, other places grew. Cities sprung up to the north and south of the valley. People built new trade routes that skipped the ruined land altogether. Some of these new towns may have owed their success to the disaster. When the old cities died, their neighbours got a boost. They scooped up the trade, the farmland, the power. But even as life returned elsewhere, the Jordan Valley stayed empty. When people finally did come back, they didn't build big cities. Instead, they started small. Scattered villages, simple houses. No more grand temples or fancy tombs. It's as if the memory of the disaster shaped how they lived. They didn't trust the land. They were careful, always watching for signs that things might go wrong again. And the new settlements avoided the ruins. They built at the edges, not on top of the old cities. In other parts of the world, people often reused ancient stones, cleared out old wells, or rebuilt on the same spot. Here, the ruins were left alone. Maybe that was superstition. Maybe it was practical, too much salt, too many strange things in the dirt. Either way, the past was left to rest. Let's look at some physical evidence from the silence. Scientists study pollen trapped in ancient mud layers. In the years before the disaster, there's a rich mix. Grains from wheat, barley, olives, grapes, even flowers. After the event, the pollen record changes. Almost overnight, the traces of farm plants disappear. Instead, you get weeds, salt-tolerant plants, scrubby bushes. It's a shift you can measure year by year. The land lost its ability to feed people. The crops didn't come back for centuries. Another piece of the puzzle is the pottery. Before the blast, the valley had a distinctive style of pots and jars. You find the same designs all over the region, proof of a shared culture. After the silence, the new pottery looks different. New shapes, new decorations, sometimes even new clays. That tells us the people moving in were not the descendants of those who lived there before. They were outsiders. Maybe they came from the hills, maybe from distant towns. They didn't rebuild the old way. They brought their own style, their own habits. It's not just pottery. Tools, too, changed. The stone and bronze tools found in post-disaster layers are simpler. Fewer fancy weapons, fewer big storage jars. No sign of the wealth that marked the old cities. It's like the valley started over at a lower level, working its way back up from scratch. What about writing? The old cities had some form of record keeping. Seals and tokens, clay tablets, maybe even early scripts. After the disaster, written records vanish from the region. The silence wasn't just physical, it was cultural. No stories, no library, no kings boasting of their power. If anyone kept track of what happened, those records are lost. Let's think about what this means. When a region loses its cities, its people, and its memory all at once, it's more than just an empty place. It's like a hole in history. Later generations could only guess what had come before. The past became a story, not a fact, and that's where legends grow. The story of Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other lost cities got passed down for hundreds of years. Each telling changed a little, the fact blurred, the silence became part of the myth. People needed a reason to explain the ruins. Maybe they blamed sin, maybe they blamed fate, or the gods, or a strange fire from the sky. The truth was, buried under layers of story and fear. Here's something interesting. When new people finally did settle the valley, they were cautious about the ruins. Archaeologists found that graves from the later period don't use the old burial towers. Instead, they dig simple pits far from the destroyed cities. It's as if the new settlers were making a clean break, not wanting to disturb whatever still lingered in the ruins. The silence also shows up in trade. Before the disaster, goods moved freely up and down the valley. After, trade routes shifted. Merchants avoided the region. Instead of passing through the old crossroads, they looped around, taking longer paths through the hills. This shift lasted for centuries. It shaped the way people moved, the way they connected to other cultures. Some scientists have tried to measure just how empty the valley was. They count the number of pottery shards, the thickness of trash layers, the number of graves. In the centuries before the disaster, the numbers are high, signs of busy life. After, the numbers drop almost to zero. Even the trash tells the story of silence. Now, you might wonder, if the land was so empty, how do we know anyone even passed through? The answer is we barely do. A few scattered campsites show up centuries later. Maybe small groups of herders, travelling between safer places, but these are rare. For the most part, the valley was a blank spot on the map. What about the people who left? Where did they go? Some may have moved north or south, joining relatives in safer towns. Some may have become wanderers. For a while, there may have been stories told by survivors, warnings passed down. But over hundreds of years, those voices faded. The old families disappeared. The valley lost its memory. And then there's the question of recovery. Why did it take so long? Partly it was the salt and the bad water, but partly it was fear. When people see a land destroyed so suddenly, they remember. Even if the reason is lost, the warning stays. Don't trust the land. Don't build too big. Don't dig too deep. The memory of loss shapes choices for generations. We see echoes of this in other places. When Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii, it was centuries before people tried to live there again. When Chernobyl melted down, the towns nearby emptied fast. And even now, very few people go back. There's something about a disaster that leaves a mark not just on the earth, but on the mind. The silence after isn't just about what's missing. It's about what people carry with them, the memory of what happened, and the fear it might happen again. The Jordan Valley's silence became a kind of legend. Even after people returned, they told stories about the lost cities. The story changed with each telling, but the core was the same. Once this land was rich. Then, in a moment, it was lost. And for a long, long time, it was best left alone. Let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Across the world, when disasters strike, people often rebuild. But sometimes the shock is so great that recovery takes generations. The Jordan Valley is one of those places. The blast didn't just wipe out buildings, it erased a way of life. The silence after Sodom wasn't just emptiness, it was a kind of warning echoing down the years. You can still read it in the ground, in the salt, the glass, the missing layers of life. The story is there if you know how to look. It's written in what's not there as much as in what is. And in that silence, legends grew. People remembered, even if they didn't know exactly what had happened. Over time, the facts faded, but the fear remained. The valley's emptiness became a story all by itself. Eventually the world moved on. The valley filled in little by little. Weeds gave way to crops. Traders found new paths. Life returned quietly. But the old ruins stayed, half buried and silent. Even now, when you walk through the Jordan Valley, you can feel something different in the air. A sense of loss. A memory you can't quite name. The silence after Sodom was real. It lasted for centuries, and it shaped everything that came next. The world forgot the details, but not the lesson. Some places, once lost, take a very long time to come back, but the story didn't disappear. It was passed down, and it changed as it travelled through time. So here's where things get really interesting. When a place like Sodom disappears, it doesn't just vanish from the world. It turns into something else, a legend, a warning, a puzzle for the ages. People hear about the ruins. They hear whispers of fire from above, of cities flattened in an instant, of land made dead and empty, and the stories begin to grow. But how does a disaster become a legend? What does it take for a real event to turn into something bigger, something almost mythical? That's what we're digging into now. Not just what happened, but how that moment echoed through time, shaping stories, beliefs, and even the way people understood the universe. Let's start by thinking about how stories survive when people don't. When a city is wiped out, the survivors scatter. Maybe a few make it to another town. Maybe they tell their children and grandchildren about the day the sky burned. Some stories are carried far from the ruins, passed down by word of mouth. But as the years go by, details get lost. The people who saw it are gone. All that's left is the warning. Don't go there. Something terrible happened. Now, imagine you're living a few hundred years later. You're growing up in a village miles from the ruins. Maybe you've never seen them yourself, but you've heard about the empty land. Your grandparents remember when the old cities were still talked about, but not much more. You hear different versions of the story. In one, the cities were destroyed because the people were wicked. In another, it was just a freak event, bad luck, or maybe the gods were angry. Over time, the details blur, but the sense of danger remains. This is how legends grow. When people try to explain something huge and strange, they add meaning. They make the story fit the world they know. Sometimes they add a moral lesson. Don't be greedy. Don't turn away strangers, or you'll end up like Sodom. Other times they focus on the power of nature. Fire can fall from the sky. The earth can swallow cities whole. You can't control everything. These stories become part of the culture. They're told around fires, whispered in the dark, used to scare children into behaving. But here's something that often gets missed. Legends aren't just warnings. They're also a way for people to make sense of loss. When something terrible happens and nobody understands why, it's natural to look for a reason. Humans hate random tragedy. We want a cause. We want to know why people died, why cities fell, why the land is empty. So we build stories that explain it. Sometimes those stories last for thousands of years. There's another layer to this. The story of Sodom didn't stay in one place. It travelled. Traders and wanderers carried it along the old trade routes. As they went from town to town, the story changed. Details shifted to match local beliefs. In one area, the blame fell on sin. In another, on forgotten gods. Sometimes the story was just about a city destroyed by fire. Sometimes it became a symbol for something bigger, a warning about pride, cruelty, or ignoring the rules. Think about how powerful that is. A single moment, a flash of light, a crash, an empty land, turns into a legend that lives on long after the people are gone. It shapes how people see the world. It becomes a tool for teaching, for warning, for remembering. Let's look at how this happened with Sodom. The story ended up in the Bible, but it probably started much earlier. Stories about cities destroyed by fire show up in older traditions, in places far from where Sodom stood. Some scholars think that the writers of the Bible took old local tales and shaped them into something new. They added details that fit their beliefs. They used the story to warn their people, don't make the same mistakes, remember what happened to Sodom. Over time, the story grew even more powerful. It became a symbol for ultimate punishment. When people wanted to talk about the worst thing that could happen, they pointed to Sodom. This is what happens if you cross the line. If you break the rules, you risk total destruction. But here's the twist. While the legend focused on morals, on right and wrong, the real danger wasn't moral at all, it was cosmic. The thing that wiped out Sodom didn't care if people were good or bad. It was a rock or a ball of ice from space, moving so fast that nothing could stand in its way. The disaster was bigger than any human choice. This is what makes the story so strange and so important. People needed an explanation. They needed a reason for the destruction, so they built one. They gave it meaning. But the truth is, sometimes the universe doesn't give us reasons. Sometimes things just happen. Disasters can strike at random. City can vanish in a heartbeat and no one is to blame. Let's step back and look at other stories like this. Across the world, ancient people told tales of cities lost in a single night. Atlantis sinking beneath the sea. Pompeii buried under ash. Whole kingdoms swallowed by earthquakes, floods, or fire from the sky. In each case, the facts and the legends get mixed together. Sometimes the disaster was real. Sometimes it was a warning or a way to explain ruins that nobody could remember building. Sodom is just one example. Its story survived because it was so dramatic. Fire from the sky, a city reduced to ash, land that stayed empty for centuries. It's the kind of story that sticks in your mind even if you don't know the details. Now let's talk about how stories like this shape our view of the past. When archaeologists find ruins, they look for clues about what happened. But they also pay attention to the legends. Sometimes the stories point them to places worth digging. Other times the legends get in the way, making it hard to see the real facts. With Sodom, the legend and the science line up in strange ways. The story says fire fell from heaven. The ground says there was a massive blast, hotter than anything humans could make at the time. The legend says the land was cursed and stayed empty. The science says the land was poisoned by salt and glass, and people avoided it for centuries. The match isn't perfect, but it's close enough that people wonder, did the legend preserve a memory of a real event? Here's where things get even more interesting. The story of Sodom didn't just stay in ancient texts. It shaped how people thought about disasters for thousands of years. Whenever something terrible happened, a city burned, a flood wiped out a village, people reached for the story. They compared their own loss to Sodom's. This is just like what happened in the old days. We must have done something wrong. The legend became a framework for understanding tragedy. This is a pattern you see everywhere. Humans are storytellers. When faced with something too big to understand, we reach for old tales. We use them to make sense of new events. We look for patterns, even when the cause is just random chance. Let's look at how the legend changed over time. Early versions focus on fire and destruction. Later, the story adds details about sin, angels, and warning signs. Each new version reflects the values and fears of the time. When people worried about outsiders, the story warned about not welcoming strangers. When people feared the anger of the gods, the story became a lesson in obedience. The same basic event, a city destroyed, turned into a story that could mean many different things depending on who told it. There's something powerful in that flexibility. The story of Sodom could be used by anyone for any purpose. It could warn kings not to get too proud. It could remind ordinary people to follow the rules. It could explain why a stretch of land was empty and strange. It could even comfort people after a disaster by saying, "This isn't new. It happened before. People survived. Life goes on." But underneath all the layers, the real danger was always there. A force from beyond the earth. Something so big and random that no one could see it coming. Today, we know more about these threats. We track asteroids and comets. We understand that impacts from space have happened before and will happen again. But in the ancient world, there was no way to see it coming. No warning, no defense. The story of Sodom is a reminder. Sometimes the universe just acts, and we're left to pick up the pieces. Now here's a thought. What if the legend survived because people needed it to? Not just to explain the ruins, but to help them live with fear. If you believe a disaster happened because of a mistake, because someone broke a rule, you feel safer. You think, if I follow the rules, maybe it won't happen to me. It's a way to take control over chaos. The legend gives you a handle, something to hold on to, even if it's not true. But what if the real lesson is different? What if the story of Sodom is really about humility, about accepting that some things are bigger than us, that sometimes disaster comes with no warning, no reason, and no escape? Maybe that's why the story sticks with us. It reminds us that we're small, that the world is unpredictable, and that we should value what we have while we have it. Let's go back to the ruins for a minute. Imagine walking through them, centuries after the disaster. The walls are half buried in dust. Strange glass crunches under your feet. The air is still. You don't know exactly what happened here, but you feel the weight of time. You sense that something big went wrong. Maybe you tell your friend about the ruins when you get home. Maybe you make up your own version of the story. And so the legend grows one step at a time, carried by people who never saw the disaster, but still feel its shadow. This is how history turns into myth. Facts fade. Stories grow. The legend becomes more important than the details. People remember the warning, even if they don't remember the truth. And there's a final twist. The danger that destroyed Sodom is still out there. We like to think we're safe now. We have science. We have warnings. But every so often, a rock from space reminds us that we're not in control. Chelyabinsk in 2013, Tunguska in 1908. Both were airbursts, smaller than what hit Sodom, but still huge. Windows shattered. Forests flattened. If one of those landed near a city, the legend would start all over again. So what does Sodom really mean? It's a warning, yes, but not just about morals. It's a reminder that the universe is bigger than us, that stories are how we cope with fear and loss, that emptiness can be as powerful as presence, and that sometimes what's remembered is not the event itself, but the lesson we take from it. In the end, Sodom became a legend because the truth was too big, too strange, too frightening to face head-on. People built stories to hold the fear, to teach the next generation, to try to keep disaster away. But the real danger was always bigger than any story. It came from the sky, without warning, and it could happen again. And that's why the legend endures, not just as a tale of punishment, but as a memory of something real, something that changed a place forever. The silence after Sodom is gone, but the story keeps echoing. It's written in the stones, in the empty land, in the words passed down from one generation to the next. The story warned of divine punishment. But the real danger isn't moral, it's cosmic, and it could happen again. So let's face the next big question. If something like Sodom's disaster happened once, could it happen again? Not just in the same place, but anywhere. It's not just a story about the past. It's a problem for right now. The idea that a city can vanish in seconds, it's not just a legend. It's a real risk, even with all our science and warnings. Here's what makes this scary, but also kind of fascinating. The universe is full of stuff flying around. Asteroids, comets, bits of rock and ice. Most of them are small. They burn up before they even reach the ground. You see them as shooting stars just as seconds flash across the night sky. But some are bigger, big enough to make a mess if they hit. Now you might think, we'd see it coming, right? We have telescopes. We have space programs. The truth is, sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. Even today, with all our technology, we miss plenty of objects. Some are dark and hard to spot. Some come from directions we're not watching. And sometimes, we only notice them after they've passed. That's happened more than once in just the last few decades. Let's talk about how often these impacts happen, and how bad they can really be. The Earth gets hit by small stuff all the time. Hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny meteors hit every day. Most are harmless. But every so often, something bigger comes in. Scientists say an object about the size of a car hits every year or so. Those usually explode high in the sky. You might hear a boom, maybe a few broken windows. No big deal. But then there are the bigger ones. Every few hundred years, a rock the size of a house smashes into the atmosphere. That's enough to flatten a forest, or take out a city if it's unlucky. The Tunguska event in 1908 is a good example. In Siberia, early one morning, a huge explosion knocked down trees for miles. No crater, just flattened land and scorched trunks. People living nearby saw the sky light up, heard a thunder-like roar, and felt the pressure wave miles away. It was pure luck that it landed in such a remote place. If it had landed over a city, it would have been a disaster on the scale of Sodom or worse. More recently, in 2013, an asteroid about 60 feet wide exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia. No one saw it coming. It came in fast, bright as the sun, and blew up mid-air. The shockwave broke windows across the city. Over 1,000 people were hurt, mostly by flying glass. And that was a small one, compared to what's possible. So if you're wondering, how likely is another Sodom? The answer is, it's rare, but not impossible. The type of explosion that could wipe out a whole city probably happens every few thousand years. But smaller impacts, ones that could still cause chaos, are much more common. We've just been lucky lately. Now let's get into how we try to prevent these disasters. Scientists around the world track near-Earth objects, asteroids and comets that pass close to our planet. There are surveys scanning the sky every night. They find new objects all the time and keep watch on the ones that might come close. They even give them names and track their orbits, predicting when they'll next pass by. But here's the thing. The sky is huge. Space is full of surprises. Even with all our efforts, there are blind spots. Some asteroids come from the direction of the sun, making them hard to see. Others are so dark they barely reflect any light. And some are just too small to notice until they're nearly here. That's why once in a while we still get surprised. The Chelyabinsk asteroid wasn't on anyone's radar. It just showed up. There's another problem. Even if we spot a dangerous object, what can we do? Movies make it seem like we could just launch a rocket and blow it up. But in real life, that's much harder. Most ideas are still being tested. Some people talk about sending a spacecraft to nudge the asteroid off course. Others think about using lasers or even painting the surface to change how it reflects sunlight. hoping the slow push of light could shift its path. But these are just theories right now. We haven't had to try them for real. So in a strange way, we're still at the mercy of the universe, just like the people of Sodom. We know more, we can see farther. But we're still small compared to what's out there. Let's look at how different cultures have described this threat. It's not just Sodom. Ancient China has stories of sky dragons bringing fire and chaos. In South America, there are legends about the sky cracking open and raining stones. In North America, some native groups talk about times when the sun disappeared, or the land shook, or the sky let loose a storm of fire. Scientists now think some of these stories might be memories of real impacts, passed down for generations. There's something universal about these tales. They all have the same shape. A peaceful world, a sudden disaster, and then a long silence. Sometimes it's punishment, sometimes it's just fate. But the fear is always there. The idea that the sky itself can turn deadly. Modern science has given us new language, but not new safety. We talk about impact events and near-Earth objects instead of gods or dragons. But the feeling is the same. When something explodes high above, making the ground shake and the sky go white, it doesn't matter what you call it. The danger is real, and it doesn't care about who's underneath. Now let's break down what makes these impacts so powerful. It's all about energy. When an asteroid or comet slams into the atmosphere at thousands of miles per hour, it carries more energy than any weapon we've built. The air in front of it can't get out of the way fast enough, so it compresses and heats up. Sometimes the object explodes before ever hitting the ground. That's called an airburst. The explosion turns the rock to vapor, blasts out a shockwave, and rains debris over a huge area. If it does hit the ground, the results are even worse. You get a crater, molten rock, and a blast that can wipe out anything nearby. The larger the object, the bigger the zone of destruction. For the people nearby, there's no warning. Just a flash, a roar, and then nothing. Here's another thing to think about. Our cities are bigger than ancient ones. There are more people living close together. If a Sodom-sized event happened over a modern city, the damage would be huge. Not just buildings destroyed, but power lines, water systems, and roads, everything we depend on, would be gone in an instant. Emergency services might be wiped out too, and the shock would ripple out far beyond the city itself. News would travel fast, but help might not. That's why scientists take this risk seriously. It's one of the only natural disasters that could hit anywhere at any time with almost no warning. Earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, those tend to happen in certain places. But impacts don't care. They're random. Let's zoom out even more. The Earth is covered in scars from old impacts. There are craters on every continent. The biggest ones are so old they've almost disappeared. Others are fresh enough that you can still see them from space. The Chicxulub crater in Mexico is over 100 miles wide. It was made by an asteroid about 7 miles across. That's the one that helped wipe out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. It changed the whole planet. The sky went dark, the climate shifted, and most species died off. That was a once in hundreds of millions of years event. But the smaller impacts, city killers, are much more common. Here's a weird thought. If Sodom's disaster hadn't happened in a settled area, we might never have known about it. A lot of impacts hit the ocean. Some land in empty places where no one lives. Their stories vanish. But when one hits a city, the story survives. It gets told and retold until it becomes a warning for everyone else. Let's look at what we're doing to protect ourselves now. There are projects like NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office. Their job is to find and track anything that could threaten Earth. They use big telescopes, radar, and computer models to predict orbits. The goal is to spot anything dangerous with enough time to act. But there are limits. Right now, we've found most of the really large asteroids, ones big enough to end civilization. But there are still thousands of smaller objects out there, the size that could wipe out a city or a region. Those are harder to find. There are also international plans. Countries have agreed to share information, warn each other, and work together if something big is spotted. It's one of the few places where almost everyone agrees. If the sky is falling, we have to work together. Even so, there's no way to be fully safe. The system isn't perfect. There are gaps. Funding rises and falls. Some threats might slip through. That's just the reality. So, here's the big question. How do we live with this? How do you go about your day knowing something so random and powerful could happen? Most people don't think about it. We focus on the things in front of us. Work, family, daily routines. But the risk is always there, just on the edge of our awareness. Maybe that's why legends like Sodom matter so much. They give us a way to hold the fear, to turn it into a story, to make sense of something that doesn't have a reason. The story doesn't stop disasters, but it helps us remember that the world is unpredictable. You can see the same thing in how we talk about other risks. We tell ghost stories about haunted houses, legends about monsters, warnings about the big one when it comes to earthquakes. It's all about making the unknown feel known. If you can tell a story, maybe it won't feel so random. There's another angle to this. Some scientists think that remembering old disasters through stories, ruins, or even DNA might help us survive. If a culture remembers that bad things can happen, it pays more attention to the world. It values warnings. It prepares for things going wrong. That's not a guarantee, but it helps. Let's get philosophical for a minute. What does it mean to know that we're living on a planet that's not entirely safe? That the sky itself can hold surprises? Some people find it scary. Others find it freeing. The universe doesn't play favourites. It's not personal. Disasters don't care who you are, where you live, or what you believe. There's something humbling in that. Some people see it as a call to action. They want to build better warning systems, stronger cities, more resilient communities. Others just want to enjoy life while they can, knowing that nothing is forever, and here's where the past meets the present. The people of Sodom didn't have warning sirens or space telescopes. They couldn't see what was coming. But they left us a message, even if they didn't mean to. Their story survived, not just as a legend, but as a reminder. What happened to them can happen again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for a long time, but the risk is real. That's why, when you hear stories about ancient disasters, it's not just about old ruins or myths. It's about us, our fears, our hopes, our need to make sense of a world we can't control. So could it happen again? Absolutely. The universe is big. Space rocks are everywhere. Sometimes they cross paths with us. We do what we can to watch and prepare, but we can't stop everything. That's just how it is. But there's a strange comfort in knowing this. We're part of a long story, one that goes back before writing, before cities, before memory. Disasters come and go. Stories survive. People adapt. Life continues, even after the worst happens. Think about how much has changed since the days of Sodom. We've built bigger cities, flown to the moon, sent robots to other planets. But in some ways, we're still the same. Watching the night sky, hoping tomorrow will be calm, telling stories to help us sleep. And here's what matters most. Even when the danger is huge, we find ways to keep going. We remember, we plan, we build, we hope. That's what being human is about. So the next time you hear a story about a city lost in a single day, remember, it's not just a warning, it's a piece of the puzzle, a clue to how people have always faced the unknown. And if the sky ever surprises us again, we'll do what humans always do. We'll pick up the pieces, we'll tell the story, we'll keep moving forward, one day at a time. That's the real lesson. Disasters are part of life, but so is survival, so is hope, so is the simple act of looking up at the stars and wondering what's out there. But tonight we're not here to worry, we're here to rest. And there's something peaceful in understanding how time works. When you zoom out far enough, the story of Sodom is just a tiny speck on a timeline that stretches beyond anything we can really picture. If you laid out the whole history of our planet, all the rise and fall of every city, every war, every disaster, Sodom would barely register as a blip. But to the people who lived there, it was the whole world. Everything they knew was wrapped up in that single moment. For us, though, there's a bigger idea hiding behind the story. It's about time. Deep time. The kind of time that's hard to hold in your head. Let's try to put this in perspective. Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. That's 4,500,000,000 years. Try saying that out loud. It doesn't even sound real. If you counted one number every second, day and night, you'd be counting for over 140 years before you reached 4.5 billion. Human history is just the last inch on that endless ruler. Now think about human life. Most people live less than 100 years. A city might last a few hundred, maybe 1,000 if it's lucky. Empires sometimes stretch for a few thousand years, but even the longest-lasting human things are just a flicker compared to the age of the earth. The ground beneath Sodom was already ancient when the first people settled there. It had seen oceans come and go, mountains rise and crumble, forests turn to stone. In that kind of time, even the biggest disasters are like rainstorms, loud for a moment, then gone. But here's the twist. Even though we're tiny compared to deep time, we keep trying to understand it. We look for patterns, we read the rocks, we study the stars and the scars they leave behind. We want to know where we fit in the story. That's why stories like Sodom matter. They're not just about one city. They're about how humans deal with the idea that things end, that what's here today can be gone tomorrow, not just because of war or disease, but because the universe itself is unpredictable. Let's play with some numbers. If you went back just 5,000 years, you'd find the first writing. Before that, everything is guesswork. But the Earth had already been spinning for billions of years. Dinosaurs lived and died out 66 million years ago. The first mammals, our distant ancestors, were scurrying underfoot while giant lizards ruled the land. The first modern humans, people who looked like us, showed up maybe 300,000 years ago. For most of that time there were no cities, no writing, no stories written down. Just survival, day after day. So when a city like Sodom disappears and its story survives, it's a rare thing. Most places, most people, vanish without a trace. Their stories end in silence. But sometimes, a single event echoes for ages. It gets passed down, twisted and retold, until it becomes a symbol of something bigger. Here's something to think about. The rocks under your feet are old. Really old. Some are hundreds of millions of years old. Some are billions. The ground remembers things we can't even imagine. It holds the memory of ancient seas, lost forests, and impacts so huge they shook the whole planet. If you could read the rocks like a book, you'd see layer after layer of disaster and rebirth. Volcanoes, floods, ice ages, giant impacts from space. Each one wipes the slate clean, and then slowly life comes back. This is deep time in action. It moves at a pace we can't feel. Mountains grow and wear down so slowly, you'd never notice in a single lifetime. Continents drift, oceans open and close. Sometimes the change is sudden, a blast, a flood, a firestorm. Other times it's so slow it looks like nothing is happening at all. Now, humans have only been part of this story for a blink. If you imagine the history of the Earth as a 24-hour clock, humans show up in the last few seconds before midnight. All our history, all our stories fit in that tiny sliver at the end. Everything before that was just the world getting ready for us, shaping the land, making the air, filling the seas with life. But here's the thing. Even in our short time, we've started to see patterns. We've learnt to read the signs in the rocks and the sky. We know that big disasters aren't just in the past. They're part of how the planet works. Meteor craters are one example. There are more than 150 known impact craters on Earth. Some are small, just a few hundred feet wide. Others are huge, miles across. The biggest one in South Africa is almost 200 miles wide. It formed over 2 billion years ago. That's so long ago there wasn't even complex life on land yet, just simple cells living in the ocean. Some craters are young, at least by geological standards. The Barringer crater in Arizona is about 50,000 years old. That's when humans were already living in North America. Imagine seeing a fireball streak across the sky, then a blast that changed the land forever. It must have made a mark on the stories people told, but most impacts happen in empty places or long before people were around to watch. The Earth is mostly water after all. Many impacts land in the oceans. Their stories are lost, washed away by the waves. That's why the Sodom event stands out. It happened where people lived. It left a mark in the ruins and in memory. It became a lesson, a warning, and a mystery to puzzle over. When you think about deep time, it's easy to feel small. Our lives are short, our cities are temporary, even our history is just a footnote in the planet's story. But there's another way to look at it. We're part of something huge. We came from a long line of survivors, creatures that lived through ice ages, volcanoes, and ancient impacts. Every person alive today is proof that life finds a way, no matter how many disasters come and go. This idea changes how you see disasters like Sodom. They're not just endings, they're part of a cycle. Destruction, silence, then something new. A city is wiped out, but people come back eventually. Maybe not in the same place, not right away, but somewhere. Life always pushes forward. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you could stand in one spot for 1 million years. You'd see forests grow, burn, and regrow. Rivers would shift course. Lakes would dry up, then fill again. Animals would come and go. People might show up for a while, build cities, then leave. The land would remember every step, every fire, every storm. But it wouldn't care. It just keeps changing. Now, zoom in. For the people living in Sodom, the world felt permanent. The city had been there for generations. The river always flowed, the fields always gave crops. Then, in one instant, everything changed. The lesson is, nothing lasts forever. But that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes the end of one thing makes space for something else. After a disaster, the land is empty for a while, then plants come back, animals return, people find new ways to live. The story keeps going, just in a different direction. This is where deep time gives you a strange kind of comfort. No disaster, no matter how big, is the end of everything. The world keeps turning. Life adapts. People rebuild or move on. Even the worst moments fade into the background when you look at the bigger picture. Scientists have a word for this: resilience. It means the ability to bounce back, to recover after something bad happens. Life on Earth is full of resilience. It survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, and more. Each time it comes back, sometimes changed, sometimes stronger. Humans share that resilience. We might be fragile as individuals, but as a species we're tough. We figure out ways to survive. We learn from the past, even if it's just through stories. We plan for the future, even when we know we can't control everything. So what does all this mean for us today? Knowing that disasters like Sodom are part of deep time doesn't make them less scary. But it does help put things in perspective. Our problems, our fears, our hopes, they're all real, but they're not the whole story. When you step back and look at the long arc of history, you realize that every ending is just a step in a much bigger journey. The city falls, but people endure. The land changes, but life returns. The story never really stops. This brings up another idea: legacy. What do we leave behind? Most people, most cities, fade away without a trace. But sometimes something survives. A story, a ruin, a warning scratched into the earth. That's why Sodom's story matters. It's not just about one disaster. It's about the human need to remember, to pass on lessons, to warn the future. It's also about humility. We like to think we're in control. We build strong walls, invent new tools, try to predict what's coming next. But deep time reminds us we're just visitors. The world was here before us. It will be here after we're gone. That's not meant to be depressing. It's freeing in a way. If you know you're just a small part of a huge story, you can worry less about being perfect. You can focus on what matters most, caring for each other, enjoying the world while you're here, and leaving something good behind if you can. There's another lesson too. Deep time is full of surprises. Nobody living in Sodom expected the sky to explode. Nobody thought their city would become a legend. But it happened anyway. The future is always uncertain. That can be scary, but it's also what makes life interesting. Every day is a chance for something new. So when you hear stories about ancient disasters, remember they're not just warnings. They're reminders of how strong life is. How even after the worst happens, something new begins. How people come together, pick up the pieces and move forward. Here's a final thought. When you look up at the stars, you're seeing deep time in action. The light from those stars left hundreds, thousands, even millions of years ago. Some of them don't even exist anymore. But their light keeps travelling, crossing the emptiness, reaching your eyes tonight. It's a message from the past still shining in the present. In a way, stories like Sodom are the same. They're echoes from long ago, travelling through time to reach us. They remind us that we're not the first to face disaster, and we won't be the last, but we can learn, remember, and hope for better days. So, as you settle in for the night, let the idea of deep time wash over you. Feel how small your worries are compared to the story of the earth. Let it be a comfort. You're part of something ancient and ongoing. The world is full of change, but also full of second chances. And in the long run, that's what matters. Not how much we can control, but how we live with what we can't. How we remember. How we hope. How we keep telling stories, even in the dark. So, after all the digging, the guesses and the stories, what can we actually say about Sodom? And why does it still catch our attention thousands of years later? There's something almost magnetic about a city that was here one day and gone the next. It's not just the fire or the silence that followed, it's the way the story lingers, even when the ruins have faded and the people are long gone. Let's start with what we're left holding. At first, the story of Sodom seems simple. A city destroyed by disaster, its people lost, its name turned into a warning. But the closer you look, the more complicated things get. Was it a disaster from the sky? Was it a story to explain a broken world? Or is it both, history and legend tangled up together so tightly we can't pull them apart? Here's what we do know. Something happened in the Jordan Valley. A real event. The ground shows sudden heat, melted stones, broken pottery. There's a layer that shouldn't be there. full of tiny pieces of glass and burned soil. Archaeologists can measure it, hold it, test it in the lab. That's not just a story, it's a fact, and facts matter, even if they leave us with more questions than answers. But then, there's the second layer, the one made of words. People remembered what happened. They told stories, wrote warnings, turned a single moment into something bigger. That's how Sodom became a legend. It's how the story kept moving from the ancient world to today. And that's not something you can measure in a lab. Memories change as they're passed along. Sometimes the facts get twisted. Sometimes they pick up new meaning as the world changes around them. The real power of Sodom comes from that mix. Hard evidence buried in the ground and stories floating through time. Each one helps explain the other. You can't have the legend without the disaster, and you can't really understand the disaster without the legend it left behind. Think about all the ways this story has been used. For some, it's a lesson about right and wrong. For others, it's proof that we're never really safe from disaster, no matter how strong our cities look. For scientists, it's a puzzle, one that links geology, archaeology, and history in a way you don't see every day. And for most people, it's a reminder that the world can change in an instant, even if you're sure you've built something that will last forever. If you look around the world, you'll find echoes of the Sodom story everywhere. Cities buried by volcanoes, towns washed away by floods, whole regions left empty by war, famine, or disease. Each one has its own legend, its own warning, its own reason for being remembered. But Sodom stands out, partly because the story kept growing. It crossed languages, religions, even continents. It's become a kind of shorthand for disaster, even for people who don't know where the original city stood. There's something else going on too. When you hear about a place wiped away overnight, it stirs up deep questions. What would you do if you saw the sky go bright and the ground shake? If your home was there 1 second and gone the next? These aren't just questions for ancient times. People still face sudden disaster today. Earthquakes, fires, storms, things nobody saw coming. The fear, the confusion, the drive to tell the story afterward, it's all the same. You might wonder, do we ever really learn from these old disasters, or do we just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over? That's a tough one. Humans are great at telling stories about the past, but not always great at listening to the warnings. Still, each time a legend like Sodom gets told, it's a chance for someone to pay attention, to ask, what would I do? Could this happen again? Sometimes that's enough to change a few lives, or even save them. Now, let's flip the question around. Why do we keep coming back to these stories even when they're scary? Part of it is curiosity. We want to know what really happened. We want to solve the puzzle. But there's another reason too. These stories remind us that even the worst days aren't the end. People find ways to survive, rebuild and move forward. The ruins might stay empty for a long time, but eventually life pushes back in. New stories grow on top of the old ones. It's easy to get caught up in the details, dates, numbers, broken pots and burned walls. But at the heart of it all is a simple truth. Change is part of life. No city, no matter how strong, lasts forever. No story is ever finished. Each ending leads to something new, even if it takes a while to see what that is. Let's talk about luck for a minute. The people of Sodom probably thought their world was solid. They built walls, planted fields, made plans for the future. Then out of nowhere, everything shifted. Sometimes survival is just luck. Being in the right place at the right time or missing disaster by a few miles. That's not a comfortable thought, but it's honest. We don't control everything. Sometimes the only thing we get to decide is how we react when things fall apart. And yet, out of that mess, something amazing happens. New stories begin. People adapt. They find new homes, new ways to live. They remember what was lost, but they don't let it stop them from going forward. If you trace the history of any region, you'll see this pattern again and again. Disaster, silence, return. Each cycle brings new people, new ideas, new hopes. There's also a lesson about memory itself. The ruins of Sodom might have disappeared if nobody had bothered to remember, but someone did. Maybe a wandering survivor, maybe a trader passing through empty fields. Someone told the tale, and it spread. That's how history works. It's not just about what happened, but what we choose to hold on to. And sometimes, the details get lost or changed, but the heart of the story stays. Sodom turned from a ruined city into a symbol. It became a way to talk about danger, about loss, about facing the unknown. Even if we never find every answer, the story still has power. So here's where all this leaves us. We can dig up ruins, test strange glass, read old stories, and argue about what really happened. In the end, Sodom is a mystery with pieces missing, but it's a mystery that connects us to everyone who's ever wondered what comes next after disaster. It reminds us that nothing is certain, nothing is forever, and that's okay. Maybe that's what draws us to stories like this, especially late at night. When the world feels quiet and our minds drift to bigger questions. What will last? What will be forgotten? What stories will people tell about us long after we're gone? There's one more idea to hold on to. Even when cities fall and stories grow fuzzy, the need to understand, to connect, to remember, that never goes away. We're storytelling creatures. We use legends to make sense of chaos, to warn each other, to share hope. The ruins are silent now, the fields are empty. But the story keeps moving, carried by voices and memories, whispered into the future. Sodom isn't just a warning. It's a reminder that we're part of something that keeps rolling forward, no matter what. So as you think about Sodom, about what was lost and what survived, remember that you're connected to everyone who ever wondered about the past. You're part of the chain. The questions we ask, the stories we share, they matter. They help us face what comes next, even if we don't have all the answers. And maybe in the end, that's enough. To wonder, to remember, to hope, to carry the story forward, one quiet night at a time.